In a crowded marketplace, Abeni, a proud and beautiful woman, stood before the village elders. When asked if she was the wife of Olumide, a humble farmer, she scoffed and declared, "I have no husband." Gasps filled the air, and Olumide's face fell with humiliation. But what happened next no one could have ever predicted. Abeni's heart pounded as she stood in the middle of the bustling marketplace, the stares of the villagers burning into her skin. The moment the question had been asked, she felt the weight of her answer before it even left her lips. Yet, instead of acknowledging her husband, she straightened her back, tilted her chin upward, and let out a soft, mocking laugh. "I have no husband," she declared, her voice carrying through the air like the toll of a warning bell. The marketplace fell silent. The merchants, the traders, the elders, all froze, their eyes darting between Abeni and the man she had just erased with her words. Olumide stood a few feet away, his hands clenched at his sides. His chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths, though the pain in his eyes betrayed the storm within him. He had worked tirelessly for their home, to provide food, safety, and love. But in a single moment, in front of the entire village, Abeni had cast him aside like a forgotten relic. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mothers whispered behind their palms. The young boys who had once admired Olumide for his kindness now looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. The elders frowned, shaking their heads at Abeni's words. One of the noblemen, draped in fine robes and adorned with golden ornaments, studied her with interest. Abeni could feel his gaze, warm like the morning sun, and she basked in it. This was what she wanted: admiration, status, power. Not the life of a simple farmer's wife. Olumide exhaled and turned away. He did not argue, did not protest. Instead, he walked past her, his steps slow but steady, disappearing into the marketplace without another word. Abeni forced herself to ignore the tightening in her chest. This was her chance to rise above, to become something greater than what the village expected of her. Laughter erupted from the crowd, but it was not the joyous kind. It was mocking, cutting through her like the edge of a blade. She turned sharply, her confidence wavering. "Did you see that?" one woman whispered. "She threw away a good man like spoiled grain." "She has no shame," another added. Abeni clenched her fists. These were the same people who had once praised her beauty, who had envied her life. But now, they spoke of her with contempt. Her triumph felt hollow. The nobleman who had been watching stepped forward, his rich garments rustling as he approached. "You are a bold woman," he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. One unafraid to carve her own path. Abeni swallowed. This was what she had wanted: to be seen by men of power, to be considered more than just a farmer's wife. But as she met his gaze, something about it unsettled her. His eyes held amusement, but not admiration. He had witnessed her betrayal, and he saw what it meant. "I admire such boldness," he continued, circling her as if she were something to be examined. "But tell me, if you deny your own husband so easily, what loyalty would you show to another?" The words stung, sharp and unforgiving. The villagers murmured their agreement. The nobleman had said it plainly. If she could discard Olumide so effortlessly, what value did her word truly hold? Abeni opened her mouth to reply, to defend herself, but nothing came. The nobleman let out a chuckle, a knowing smirk playing on his lips before he turned away, uninterested. The moment he left, the weight of her choice pressed down on her shoulders. The villagers had already begun to disperse, their disappointment evident in their expressions. She was no longer the woman they admired. She was something else now, someone they whispered about, someone they judged. Her feet remained planted in the dirt, the sun now feeling harsher against her skin. She had thought herself victorious, but as she looked around, she realized the truth. She had won nothing. Instead, she had lost something far greater than she could have ever imagined. Olumide was gone. The villagers had turned their backs, and the very people she had sought to impress had seen her for what she had become. That night, as the village settled under the dim glow of the moon, Abeni sat outside her home, her thoughts tangled in the weight of the day's events. The laughter, the whispers, the piercing gaze of the nobleman, all replayed in her mind like a haunting melody. She had thought herself triumphant, standing tall in the marketplace, yet the emptiness within her chest gnawed at her. The absence of Olumide, his steady presence, the warmth of his voice, left a hollow ache she refused to acknowledge. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and burning firewood, but something else lingered in the air, something unspoken, a force unseen yet deeply felt. A shiver crawled up her spine. The old village elder had spoken of the spirits, warning her that they were always watching, listening, waiting. Abeni had dismissed it as superstition, the ramblings of those too afraid to carve their own destiny. Yet, as the wind whispered through the trees, she felt a strange unease settle over her. She rose to her feet and stepped toward the small stream near the edge of the village. The water had always been a source of clarity for her, its stillness calming, its depths mysterious. Kneeling beside it, she peered into her reflection. But what she saw sent a chill racing through her veins. The image staring back was not hers. The face was familiar yet distorted, eyes darker, lips curled in an eerie smirk. Abeni gasped and recoiled, her pulse hammering against her ribs. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the vision away. When she opened them again, the reflection was hers once more, but the feeling of dread remained. A rustling in the nearby trees made her whip around, heart pounding. The village was quiet, yet something shifted in the shadows. A soft whisper, barely audible, sent a wave of unease through her. It was not the wind. It was something else. Abeni. Her name carried through the air, hushed, almost mournful. She turned swiftly, eyes scanning the darkness, but she saw no one. The night stretched on, vast and unyielding, but she felt its presence. Something was near, watching, waiting. She forced herself to stand, shaking off the lingering fear. It was exhaustion, nothing more. The weight of the day had unsettled her mind. She needed rest, to push away the creeping dread that clung to her thoughts. Returning to her home, she lay down on the woven mat, pulling the thin cloth over her shoulders. The silence of the night should have been comforting, but instead, it pressed down on her. The whispers had faded, yet their echo remained, curling around her thoughts like vines tightening around stone. Sleep came in fragments, restless and broken. When she finally drifted into slumber, her dreams were not her own. Shadows moved around her, shifting, changing. Faces she recognized, villagers, elders, the noblemen, stood before her, their expressions blank, eyes hollow. And then Olumide. He did not speak, did not move. He simply stood, watching her. His presence was not angry, not resentful, but heavy with something else. Disappointment. Abeni wanted to call out to him, to break the silence that stretched between them, but her voice would not come. Then a whisper. Soft, chilling. You have been seen. Her eyes snapped open, her body rigid with fear. The room was unchanged, the night still wrapped around the village. But the whisper lingered in her ears, the dream clinging to her skin like damp cloth. Abeni sat up, drawing in slow, steady breaths. She refused to believe in curses, in spirits, in unseen forces that dictated fate. And yet, the weight of something beyond her understanding pressed down on her. The village elder's words echoed in her mind. The spirits are watching. Abeni swallowed hard, gripping the cloth around her. It was just guilt, she told herself. Nothing more. A passing dream, a trick of the mind. Yet, deep within her, a part of her knew. Something had begun, and there was no turning back. The morning arrived in muted colors, the sky painted in hues of gray, as if the world itself mirrored the unrest within Abeni's heart. She stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would cleanse the lingering weight of the night's visions. The village was already stirring, smoke curling from clay ovens, voices rising in the distance. Life continued as if nothing had changed, yet within her, everything felt different. She had barely taken a step toward the well when a group of women turned in her direction. Their conversation fell silent, their gazes cold, unreadable. Abeni lifted her chin, feigning indifference, but the tightness in her chest betrayed her. The night's events clawed at her mind, the whispers, the distorted reflection, the presence of something unseen. She forced herself to push them away, to focus on what mattered. But the village's reaction to her betrayal could not be ignored. She saw it in the way the elders no longer acknowledged her, in the way the children no longer ran past her home in playful laughter. She had made a choice. Now, she had to live with it. Determined to carry on, she made her way to the market, though the stairs followed her. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if unseen hands pressed down upon her shoulders. At the market, the usual vibrancy was dulled. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. Some faces held quiet judgment, others concealed smirks, as though reveling in the downfall of one who once thought herself untouchable. She ignored them. Yet, as she reached for a bundle of ripe yams, the merchant pulled them back, his expression unreadable. "I cannot sell to you, Abeni." His voice held neither anger nor malice, just a quiet finality. Her stomach twisted. "Why?" He hesitated before lowering his voice. "The spirits do not favor you." The words struck her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to argue, to deny the foolishness of such superstition, but something in his gaze silenced her. It was not fear. It was certainty. Before she could respond, he turned away, tending to another customer as if she were no longer standing there. Abeni clenched her fists, her breathing uneven. This was absurd. The spirits had nothing to do with this. It was gossip, judgment, nothing more. But as she walked through the market, the rejection followed her. Merchants avoided her gaze. Friends who once welcomed her with open arms now treated her as if she carried an unseen curse. The elder's warning echoed in her mind. "You have brought shame upon a good man. The spirits are watching." She shook off the thought. This was not about spirits. It was about the villagers and their foolish beliefs. She would not allow fear to control her. Still, she could not shake the sensation that something had shifted, that an unseen force lurked just beyond her reach, waiting. That night, as she sat alone in her empty home, she felt it again. The weight of something unspoken, the air thick with an unnameable presence. The flames from her lantern flickered, casting restless shadows along the walls. A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, though the windows were shut. Her heart pounded as the candle's flame wavered, then stilled. Then a sound. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves. Then clearer. A whisper. Abeni's breath hitched. She turned sharply, but the room was empty. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and suffocating. "You do not see," the voice murmured. She stumbled back, her pulse racing. The voice was neither near nor far, neither male nor female. It was everywhere and nowhere. "I see everything." Abeni clutched her arms, her skin cold despite the warmth of the night. "This is foolish," she whispered to herself, though even as the words left her lips, she did not believe them. The shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally along the walls. Her own reflection in the small mirror across the room flickered, just for a moment. Just long enough for her to see it. A face that was not hers. A scream built in her throat, but no sound escaped. The air thickened, pressing against her chest like unseen hands. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the presence faded. The candle's flame steadied. The room was still once more. Abeni fell to her knees, gasping for breath. She had always scoffed at the old stories, dismissed the elders' warnings as the ramblings of fearful minds. But now, in the silence of her empty home, she could no longer deny it. Something was watching, and it was waiting. The weight of the night's terror clung to Abeni like a second skin. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, every flicker of shadow sent her pulse racing. The presence had vanished, yet its absence felt just as suffocating. The words it had whispered echoed in her mind, unrelenting, haunting. She needed answers. With the first light of dawn, she wrapped herself in a shawl and hurried toward the elder's hut. The village was only beginning to stir, Yet the air felt different. A hush had settled over everything, as though the land itself sensed something was amiss. The elder sat outside her home, grinding herbs with slow, deliberate movements. Her weathered face remained impassive as Abeni approached. "You have seen them now, haven't you?" The elder's voice was low, filled with something Abeni could not place. Abeni hesitated. Denial sat on the tip of her tongue, but she could no longer pretend. The presence had been real. The voice had spoken, and she had felt its unseen hands brush against her very soul. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The elder nodded, as though she had expected this. "The spirits do not act without reason. You turned your back on something sacred. Now, you must face the consequence." Abeni's throat tightened. She had been proud, yes. But did a single mistake warrant this? "I did not harm anyone," she argued, though even she felt the weakness in her defense. The elder's sharp gaze pinned her in place. "You humiliated a man who did nothing but love you. You dishonored a bond not meant to be discarded so easily. The spirits do not look kindly upon such things." Abeni clenched her fists. Regret gnawed at her, but it was tangled with frustration. She had only wanted something better. How could wanting more lead to this? "Is there a way to stop it?" she asked, barely able to contain the tremor in her voice. The elder studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Only true humility can cleanse the stain you have placed upon yourself. But the spirits do not accept empty words. They will not be deceived." Abeni swallowed hard. She did not fully understand what the elder meant, but the weight of her warning was clear. She could not simply apologize. She had to mean it. The journey back to her home felt heavier than before. Every step dragged, her body weighed down by the burden of what lay ahead. The truth she had denied for so long had settled deep within her. She had lost something precious, something irreplaceable. When she stepped inside, the air was thick with silence. She sat on the floor, pressing her forehead against her knees. The memories of Olumide's quiet patience, his unwavering love, his silent suffering in the marketplace replayed in her mind. She had seen the pain in his eyes that day, yet she had ignored it, believing herself triumphant. Now she saw the truth. She had not gained anything. She had only destroyed what was once whole. The spirits were right to turn their gaze upon her. The night came swiftly, shadows creeping across the walls, stretching unnaturally. Abeni did not resist the fear this time. She allowed herself to feel it, to acknowledge it. She stepped outside, the village asleep around her. The moon loomed overhead, casting its silver glow across the land. Slowly, she knelt in the dirt, pressing her hands to the earth. The cold seeped into her skin, grounding her, humbling her. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was foolish. I chose vanity over love. And now, I see what I have lost." A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of damp soil and distant rain. She closed her eyes. "I do not ask for mercy. I only ask to understand." The wind swirled around her, rustling the leaves, whispering through the trees. A sound, soft yet unmistakable, filled the air. Footsteps. She turned sharply, her breath catching. There, standing at the edge of the shadows, was Olumide. He did not move, did not speak. He only watched. Tears stung her eyes. "I am sorry," she choked out. "For all of it." For a moment, the night held its breath. Then, slowly, Olumide nodded. And just like that, the weight lifted. The air cleared. The shadows withdrew. The spirits had seen her, and they had listened. Abeni remained kneeling on the cool earth, her breath shallow as she stared at Olumide. The moonlight cast a soft glow upon his face, yet he looked distant, as if standing on the edge of two worlds. Her heart pounded. She wanted to reach for him, to close the space between them, but fear held her in place. Fear that if she moved, he would disappear like mist at dawn. His silence was unbearable. She had spoken her truth, stripped away her pride, laid her regrets before the spirits. But what she feared most was that it was too late. She had shattered something sacred, and not all things could be mended. The wind shifted, rustling the trees in a quiet murmur. It was as though the very night awaited his answer. Finally, Olumide stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. Abeni's fingers dug into the dirt as she searched his face for a sign, for anger, for sorrow, for anything that would tell her what lay within his heart. But his expression was unreadable. "You shamed me," he said, his voice steady. There was no hatred in his words, no bitterness. That somehow hurt even more. Tears pricked her eyes. "I know. I loved you, Abeni," he continued. "Not because of what you looked like, not because of what you could offer. I loved the soul within you. But you did not see me." The weight of his words crashed down on her. She had been blinded by vanity, too consumed by the hunger for more to recognize the treasure she already possessed. She swallowed the sob that threatened to break free, but her body trembled under the weight of remorse. "I was foolish," she admitted, voice trembling. "I let my pride destroy something that was true. I do not ask for forgiveness. I only wish you to know that I see it now. I see you now." A moment passed, stretched between them like the fragile thread of an unraveling cloth. The night air was thick with something unseen, the spirits still watching, waiting. Then, Olumide sighed, a sound that carried the weight of wounds not yet healed. "There was a time when I would have given anything to hear those words." Abeni's chest tightened. The past could not be undone. He had suffered because of her, and no apology, no realization, could erase that. "But time moves forward," he said, his voice softer now. "And so must we." The meaning in his words struck deep. She wanted to hold on to him, to beg him to stay, but she knew now that love was not a thing to be possessed. It was given freely, and once broken, it did not always return in the way one wished. Olumide looked at her for a long moment, then he turned. Abeni watched as he walked away, his steps measured, unwavering. He did not vanish into the night like a ghost, nor did he fade like a vision. He was real, he was whole, and he was leaving. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she did not call after him. The wind whispered through the trees once more, but this time, it did not carry a warning. It carried acceptance. The spirits had seen her surrender, and they had taken their price, not through punishment, but through understanding. She had lost him, yet in the loss, she had found herself. Abeni remained kneeling, the cool earth grounding her, the silence wrapping around her like a final embrace. When she finally rose, the night had begun to fade, the first traces of dawn painting the sky in soft golds and purples. She took one last look at the path where Olumide had disappeared, then turned toward the village. She did not know what awaited her, did not know how she would rebuild her life, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never make the same mistake again. With steady steps, she walked forward, leaving behind the weight of who she had been, stepping into the unknown, into the light of a new day.